As 1862 comes to a close, the Civil War has changed in a number of ways. First of all, the Union has finally started to see some success as Grant's army is moving down the Mississippi trying to cut the Confederacy in half. They did manage to stop Lee's invasion of the North at Antietam, and Lincoln has emancipated the slaves. Now, it's still a long way to go. They haven't cut the South in half yet, and it's going to be hard to capture Vicksburg. The North still really hasn't been able to defeat Lee outright in battle, and they're a long way from capturing the capital at Richmond. And emancipating the slaves is really only going to help if they can take over the South. So, the North has a long way to go. In the fall of 1862, they had tried to invade Virginia again and had been badly defeated by Lee at the Battle of Fredericksburg. So as 1863 begins, we're once again going to see action around the Eastern Theater as Northern armies attempt to defeat Lee and take Richmond. So after their defeat at Fredericksburg, they wait till the end of the winter and the spring. Another general is promoted to command, General Hooker, and he tries to invade the South. Again, Lee pulls the same stunt as he had pulled at Second Bull Run. He divides his forces. He sends Jackson around while he's attacking the force to outflank the enemy, and it works again. They crush the Union Army at Chancellorsville. But during the fight, one of his most trusted generals, Stonewall Jackson, who he had twice given command of part of the army to outflank the enemy in battle, Jackson gets shot by mistake by his own men in the twilight as he's riding forward, trying to see if they should continue pursuing the Union. And although he's not initially killed, they amputate his arm, he gets sick, he dies. Lee will never be able to replace Jackson. And so he's lost a very valuable lieutenant general here. Now, at this point, Lee decides, again, it is time to invade the North and end this war. So he marches once again into Northern territory, this time past Washington, D.C., all the way up into Pennsylvania. And the Confederate and Union armies end up meeting together at an unlikely little town called Gettysburg. For 3 days up here at Gettysburg, Lee, because he's the invading army, he must attack, he must defeat the enemy, and he chooses to make those attacks at Gettysburg rather than maneuvering for a different position. And so for 3 days, he makes the attacks. And on the first day of the attacks, they drive the North back out of the town, and the North takes up positions on some high hills south of town. The second day, Lee attacks both the left and right flank of the Union armies and has a little bit of success attacking Culp's Hill, getting about halfway up on the right, fighting for Little Round Top and fighting in the area called Devil's Den. Both armies take extreme casualties, but the Confederates fail to take the high ground, to take those positions. So on the third day, Lee comes up with a different strategy. Put everything he's got, his freshest troops, and attack them in the middle and try to break their lines. And in what's known as Pickett's Charge, because George Pickett's Virginia troops are the ones that have just arrived on the battlefield, and they will lead the charge. A force of 15,000 Confederates charge over a mile of land against those Yankee positions up on the hill, and they temporarily break through, but just temporarily, because as soon as they break through, more Union troops from the right and left flank come pouring in. They patch the gap in the line and drive what's left of those Confederate troops back. After 3 days, Lee could not break the Union position. And so Lee has been defeated. Lee retreats back to the south. General Meade, who is in command of the Union Army this time around, because Hooker had been fired after being defeated, Meade fails to stop Lee from getting away, and Lincoln is furious that Meade didn't beat him on Northern soil and finish this war now. But after 3 days of fighting, He didn't feel like he could stop Lee and fight another day, so Lee's army slips away, and on July 4th, Lee's army is withdrawing from Gettysburg, heading back down south where the war will continue. But never again will Lee's army be strong enough to invade the North. Just by coincidence, on the exact same day, and just ironically, it's on July 4th, America's birthday, not only is Lee retreating in defeat, but on the other side of the country, Grant finally captures Vicksburg. Now, for months, Grant had been maneuvering, trying to find an approach to capture Vicksburg, but it was well defended. Eventually, he laid siege to the town. After weeks of bombardment and being surrounded and besieged, the people of Vicksburg could take it no more. And on July 4th, completely unaware that Lee had been defeated and was retreating on that same day, but on July 4th, the Confederate Army at Vicksburg surrenders. The Mississippi finally is going to be cut in half, and the Confederacy will no longer be able to get troops or supplies from the West, and now the North can focus in on finishing the war, capturing the eastern parts of the Confederacy. Grant is a big hero, and because he wins this battle, and Meade had fallen out of favor with Lincoln because he was unable to stop Lee from getting away, Grant will be promoted to the top general in the entire Union Army and will come up with a strategy to finish this war. So, as 1864 begins, there are some battles that we don't quite have time to cover, but after securing Tennessee, Grant decides that he is personally going to head back east and lead the Union armies that are fighting Lee and try to take Richmond, which nobody had been able to do at this point. His right-hand general, William Tecumseh Sherman, he is going to lead troops now into Georgia, fighting the main Western Confederate Army there. As Sherman's army marches into Georgia, his goal is going to be Atlanta, and after a series of battles, his army finally reaches Atlanta. And in just a short fight, they capture the city. The city does partially get burned by Confederates as they destroy supplies as they're leaving. Sherman will order more buildings and supplies to be destroyed, and the city will end up burning. And, well, the Confederacy, Southerners, they like to blame Sherman completely for this. He's partially to blame, but it wasn't all him. But Atlanta is greatly wrecked by the capture of Atlanta. Now Sherman is going to march from Atlanta to South Carolina. And there's no Confederate army left. He had crushed the Western army, and what was left of it had slunk away to the west. And so there's no army opposing him as he marches from Atlanta to the sea. And so his army stretches out 100 miles across, and they destroy food and supplies, and they terrorize the Southern people. But this is part of that new concept of total war, where we're not just defeating an enemy's army, but we're completely crushing their society's ability to wage war. So we're destroying supplies. We're terrorizing the people, making them lose the will to fight. And he marches to the sea. Well, while all that's going on, back up here, Grant is trying to capture Richmond. So, as Grant begins his approach to Richmond, he has an army now of about 118,000 men. The Confederate army is dwindling. Lee has about 69,000 men to oppose him. Lee knows he's outnumbered, so Lee moves his army. He's trying to defend Richmond. So he moves his army into a wooded area called the Wilderness. That way he has trees and forests to kind of limit the maneuvers of the Yankee army. And in a bloody, horrifying fight as the forest catches fire, they fight it out, and the Union is unable to break through. But unlike other generals, when he can't beat Lee, instead of marching back and reorganizing, Grant decides he's going to attempt to go around. And so Lee moves to stop him, And the next battle is called the Battle of Spotsylvania. Again, Lee's army stops Grant. So Grant decides to try to go around again. And this time, Lee's army moves to stop him at the Battle of Cold Harbor. Now, the whole time, both armies are taking heavy casualties. And the Confederate army is dwindling now to around 59,000 men or so. They've lost a lot of men. The Union army is just getting stronger. They've lost way more men than the Confederates. They've been doing the attacking, but they've got a bigger population. They just keep bringing more and more men to replace the ones they lose. So the Union army gets stronger, the Confederate army gets weaker, but after Cold Harbor, it was such a bloody battle that even Grant started to think, well, you know what, this was way too much loss of life. My frontal assaults are just the wrong move. I need to do something a little different. And so what Grant's going to attempt to do here, try to move this where you can see the full screen. There we go. He's trying to get to Richmond. So this time, he is going to attempt to go around the Confederate Army all the way to Petersburg and approach Richmond from the south. Richmond is supplied by the railroad that runs through Petersburg, and if he can capture Petersburg, he's cut Richmond off. And Lee is looking for Grant somewhere over here, and at first he doesn't know where Grant has gone, and Grant almost made it through before Lee realized, but in the nick of time, Lee realizes that Grant has moved to Petersburg. Lee will end up moving his army down to Petersburg just in the nick of time to block the northern advance. And at this point, the siege of Petersburg begins. And week after week, the Union attacks and tries to find a way through, and the Confederates manage to hold the Union. But as day after day continues, the North brings in more and more forces. They extend their lines. There's even forces approaching from the north. The Confederates are stretched thinner and thinner. They're losing more and more men. And finally, by April of 1865, they've held out as long as they possibly could. The North finally makes a breakthrough, and Lee is forced to take what's left of his army and try to escape. Lee is hoping to make it away from there, link up with another Confederate army down in North Carolina, but he does not make it. Grant follows him, catches Lee's army at a place called Appomattox Courthouse and blocks the path. Lee has an option. He can fight one glorious battle and go out like that. He could tell his men to scatter, hide in the woods, and fight a guerrilla war for maybe years. But Lee realizes at this point it's all lost. Richmond has fallen. The government is fleeing. The Confederacy has been laid waste. The slaves have all been freed by this point, or are on their way to being freed. The old Southern way of life, even if they found a way to win at this point, is gone. So Lee decides the right thing to do is surrender. So he meets with Grant. And Grant is very generous in his terms of surrender. He allows the Confederate troops to be paroled. They won't be held prisoner. They go home. If they have a horse or a mule, they can take it with them to rebuild their farms. Officers are allowed the dignity of keeping their swords and their pistols, which were usually taken from prisoners as trophies of war, and they're going to take those home. It's showing them respect. Lee surrenders, and when the main Confederate force under Robert E. Lee surrenders, everyone across the country knows this war is over. And so as word spreads from location to location that Lee has surrendered, one Confederate force after another surrenders. And the Civil War finally comes to an end.